Hello, it is wonderful to be here. Hello, it is wonderful to be here. We have lots of people coming in on a Thursday afternoon. Gonna be enjoying ourselves and together again. Hello, ladies. Today is Thursday, May 21st, 2020. As you know, today is the only today that you have, and I hope you make it the very best possible today that you can. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am grateful to be present with you in this grand adventure called The Sign of the Beaver. I want to pass some love your way. I want to give huge props to a few people. Mag, you are here. It is good to see you. Thank you so much. As adventures are going to abound in these next periods of time, I am grateful that you are here. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be playing with a few new concepts. I am super grateful for you to be here. So one of the things that you know Mr. O always asks you to have with you when you enter this world is a notebook. Notebooks are really good. One, they show documentation that you were present. Two, that you use it as a tool to be able to review what you've read. And three, being able to make sure that you keep your section for Sign of the Beaver consistent. Today, we are going to start by putting a brand new page in. I've got my chapters 1 and 2. Then I've got my chapters 3 through 5 in regards to what I've been doing. And now I need us to do something, because on the last piece that we read, we recognized that there was some new characters that were introduced. Some very significant new characters that will be coming into play a lot for the rest of the book. And so I want to say, as an experienced reader and an experienced person with this particular novel, that it is really, really important that we take a minute and act it over time. It's going to be kind of like us carrying a satchel. A satchel that we say the only things that are going to go into this satchel are rocks that I find on my adventure or leaves that I find on my adventure. So we're categorizing. We're going to make this particular page a really important one. So it's going to come before chapter 6. So we are going to put the word vocabulary. And in fact, it's not just any kind of vocabulary. It's going to be special and important vocabulary. I'm going to title mine Native Words, because today we are going to be learning some of the language of the people in the region of Maine Territory. So I'm not going to give you much more than that, but I just have chosen a page and I put the words Native Words on there. And I'm going to be making kind of a little mini dictionary for when we start doing our work today. So, ladies and gentlemen, get yourself comfortable. Are you in a good place? Are you in a place where all other things are turned off? It's really one of the only things that I ask is we use this time to be together, just you and me and us as a team going through this adventure together. So I want you to find yourself a really comfortable spot. If you have a special color or if you have a few sharpened pencils like I do, just in case I happen to maybe break a pencil, maybe, just maybe, some of you are starting to want to be a little bit more creative in your variation. So maybe you bring yourself a purple highlighter, or maybe you bring yourself a green marker, a red marker, because who knows when you want to maybe put some color into the work that you're doing. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we begin clearly that he is in a very specific location. He is in the Maine Territory in northeastern United States. The year is 1768. We know that he's 12 years old. We know that a visitor came while his father has been gone. His name, Ben. Ben seemed to be somebody who we weren't quite sure of because he seemed to have been talking about having done something that he needed to keep away from town with. But then all of a sudden, the other important thing that Ben is a part of is that he does what to Matt? That's right, he steals Matt's rifle, which means he can't kill anything in regards to hunting wise. He can't get that meat. So he now is dependent on his fishing line. The other thing that we also know is that there was this statement about the idea that he came back feeling really comfortable after a day of fishing. He was comfortable with the silence, but then all of a sudden his cabin had been broken into. And it had been nature. It had been a bear that had come through and decided to feast on everything that made his life a little bit like it used to be down in Quincy, Massachusetts. And so he loses his molasses. He loses his salt. He has flour. He's got his fishing line. And then he decides, because of his little sweet tooth that he loves so much, that he's going to go sneak over to a bee tree and try to break into it. But then, as he's sneaking into the bee tree breaks open, the whole hive swarms him, he starts getting stung, and all of a sudden these Native Americans, these Indians, carry him to his place, take care of him, feed him, give him medicine, and now we wonder what comes next. So ladies and gentlemen, if you are doing verbal to visual, name chapter 6. Let chapter 6 have its own space so that you can write down anything important that might come in words or pictures or sketches, whatever you want. But here we go. Chapter 6 of Sign of the Beaver by Elizabeth George Spear. Finally, Matt woke and knew that he was well. His body was no longer on fire. He could open his eyes and he saw the sunlight glinting through the chinks in the roof. All his familiar things were around him. The shelves with the pewter dishes, his jacket hanging on a peg. He felt as though he had been on a long journey and had come home. He must have slept through half a day and a night. When the cabin door opened and the Indian entered, Matt hastily pulled himself up. Now, with clear eyes, he saw that there was nothing in the least strange about the man. He was dressed not so differently from Matt's own father. He wore a coat of some rough brown cloth and leggings fringed down the side. His face was smooth shaven, and so was his whole head, except for one long black top knot. When he saw that Matt was awake, his stern face was lighted by a wide smile. Wow, did we learn a lot right there. Did you see this man? He's older. He's not very differently dressed. I thought he was going to come in looking completely like the Indians that I've seen in pictures, the ones riding horses and stuff like that, right? But he is wearing a jacket and he has pants on that have fringes, like danglies that kind of go down the side of the pants. And he has a long black top knot, which means like a top knot up here. His head's completely shaven, but then he's got this kind of long black top knot that comes off the top of his head. But what does he do when he sees that Matt is awake? He doesn't turn into a mean man. He brightens up, half grunt. White boy, very sick. Now well. Matt remembered his father's advice. Good morning, he said respectfully. The Indian pointed a hand at his own chest. Saknis, family of Beaver. Beaver. Sign of the Beaver. Family of Beaver. Important. Saknis, family of Beaver. He said. He seemed to be waiting. I'm Matthew Hollowell, Matt answered. Good. White man leave you here? Just for a while, Matt told him. He has gone to get my mother. It did not occur to him to lie to this old man as he had to Ben. Moreover, he knew that there was something he had to say. He tried to find the right words. "I'm grateful to you," he said finally. "It was a very lucky thing you happened to find me." "We watch. White boy very foolish to climb bee tree." So he had been right, Matt thought. That eyes were watching him from the forest. He was sure that the Indian had not asked him where he lived. They had brought him straight home to his cabin, even though he knew it was good fortune that they had been watching him yesterday. He still felt somewhat resentful of their spying. Abruptly, he swung his feet to the floor and winced as a sharp pain ran up his leg. The Indian noticed, and moving closer, he took Matt's ankle between his hands and pressed gently with his fingers. "Is it broken?" Matt said. "Nada, not broke. Mend soon. Sleep now. Not need medicine more. Nada, there's one." And then right after it, it said, "not broke." "Is it broken?" Matt asked. "Nada, not broke." Do you hear it? So I'm going to put on my native words over on the very far side of it. I'm going to put NDA. That's how they spell it in the book. NDA. And I can infer that when he said, "Is it broken?" Nada, not broke. I'm going to infer that that word must mean no. Words under my in my head. "Is it broken?" Matt asked. "Nada, not broke. Mend soon. Sleep now, not need medicine more." The Indian had put something on the table as he came in. When he had gone, Matt hobbled over to see what it was and found a wooden bowl of stew, thick and greasy, flavored with some strange plant, wonderfully filling and strengthening. With it, there was a cake of cornbread, coarser than his own, but delicious. The next day, the Indian brought the boy with him. "Nequenis, you call grandson," he announced. "Attean." Okay, now I'm going to stop. Nequenis is in italics, kind of squiggly lines, and that must be Nequenis. NK. This is an interesting one, so write slowly. NKWENISS. NKWENISS. Nequenis. And then he says, "Nequenis, you call grandson." So Nequenis, the word for Nequenis is grandson. So now I know Nada, which means no, and Nequenis, grandson. So I'm going to reread the sentence to make sure I understand it. "Nequenis, you call grandson," he announced. "Attean." The two boys stared at each other. The Indian boy's black eyes held no expression whatever. Unlike the old man, he was naked except for a breechcloth held up by a string in his waist, or at his waist. Naked? Wait. Breechcloth. So a breechcloth is one of those things where he's got a rope around and he's got a piece of cloth that is draped kind of up and around so it covers his private parts and make sure that he's covered. Remember, it's super warm. So it's not like that's exactly what he's going to wear all the time. But at least on these warm days, that's what he's doing. It passed between his legs and hung down like a little apron, back and front. His heavy black hair fell straight to his shoulders. "Attean, same winter as white boy, maybe?" the man asked. He held up 10 fingers and then 4 more. 10 and 4. How old is Attean? He's 14. He's 14 years old. "I'm 13, Matt answered, holding up his own fingers. At least he excused himself. That would be true in another week. So time has passed. The Indian boy did not speak a word. Quite plainly, he had been brought here against his will. He stared about the cabin and seemed to despise everything he saw. He made Matt feel like a fool sitting with his legs propped up on a stool. Matt steadied himself on his good leg and stood up. Now he noticed that Saknis was holding out to him a rough sort of crutch. Matt wished he did not have to try it right now, with both of them watching him, but he could see that the man expected it. He managed a few steps, furious at his own clumsiness. He had never imagined how pesky a crutch might be. Moreover, although there were not the slightest change in the boy's face, Matt was sure that Attean was laughing at him. There was a nasty little gleam in the boy's eyes. The moment they were gone, he seized the crutch in earnest, and very soon he could swing himself along at a good, brisk pace. Now he was able to go about outside the cabin to check the corn patch and to bring in firewood. The trouble was that he had only one boot. The woolen stocking his mother had knit for him was wearing thin. On the rough ground, it wore through in no time. This, too, the Indian noticed. When he came with his grandson next morning, no boot when I ran. Once again, he felt ridiculous under the Indian boy's black stare. You notice that they've said that twice now? That Matt feels a little silly in presence of Attean? 3 days later, pay attention to that, 3 days later, Saknis brought him a pair of moccasins. They were handsome and new, made of moose hide, dark and glistening with grease, tied with stout thongs that were long enough to wrap about his ankles. Beaver woman make, Saknis said. Better white man's boots. White boy see. Matt took off his one boot and slipped on the moccasins. Now I know what a moccasin is. Moccasin is a pair of shoes in Native American. In this language, indeed, they were better. In fact, they were wonderful, not stiff like new boots, not knobby or pinching anywhere, light as nothing at all when he lifted his feet. No wonder Indians did not make a sound when they walked in the forest. See how he's putting it together? Shame suddenly flooded over Matt. This man had perhaps saved his life, had come bringing food and a crutch, and now these beautiful moccasins. It wasn't enough just to say an awkward thank you. He needed to give something in return, not money. There were a few silver coins in the tin box, but something made him very sure that he could not offer money to this proud old man. He looked about him in despair. There was almost nothing in his own cabin. Then he spied the 2 books on the shelf, the only 2 his father had been able to carry into the wilderness. One was the Bible. He dared not give away his father's Bible. The other book was his own, the only one that he had ever possessed, a book by the name of Robinson Crusoe. He had read it a dozen times, and the thought of parting with it was painful, but it was the only thing that he had to give. He hobbled across the room and took it down from the shelf and held it out to the Indian. Saknis stared at the book. "It's for you," Matt said. "It's a gift. Please take it." Saknis reached out and took the book in his hands. He turned it over. Then he opened it and stood peering at the page. With shame, Matt saw that he was holding it upside down. Saknis couldn't read. Of course he couldn't. Matt should have known that. He had made a terrible mistake and embarrassed the good man. He had heard once that the one thing an Indian could never forgive was a hurt to his pride. He felt his own face burning. But Saknis did not look embarrassed. His dark stare went from the book to Matt's face. "White boy, no signs?" he asked. Matt was puzzled. "White boy, read what white man write on page." "Yes," Matt admitted. "I can read it." For a long moment, the Indian studied the book. Then, astonishingly, that rare white smile flashed on Saknis's face. "Good," he grunted. "Saknis make treaty." "A treaty?" Matt was even more puzzled. "Nequenis, hunt." Nequenis. Oh, Nequenis, grandson. I've got it in my book. Nequenis, hunt. Bring white boy bird and rabbit. White boy teach Attean white man signs. You mean I should teach him to read? Good. White boy teach Attean what book say. Doubtfully, Matt looked from the old man to the boy, who stood silently listening. His heart sank. The scorn in the boy's face had turned to black anger. "Nada!" The furious word exploded. "Nada! Nada! No! Nada!" The furious word exploded. The first word Matt had ever heard Attean speak. Half under his breath, he muttered a string of incomprehensible words. His grandfather's stern face did not change. He was undisturbed by the boy's defiance. "Attean learn," he said. "White man come more and more to Indian land. White man not make treaty with pipe. White man make signs on paper. Signs Indian not know. Indian put mark on paper to show him friend of white man. Then white man take land. Tell Indian cannot hunt on land. Attean learn to read white man's signs. at his grandfather, but he did not dare to speak again. With a black scowl, he stalked out of the cabin. Good, said Saknis calmly. He handed the book back to Matt. Attean comes, SEBA, tomorrow. SEBA. Ah, I got another one. SEBA. S-E-B-A. SEBA. It means tomorrow. Tomorrow. So I have Nada, which means no. I have Nequenis, which means grandson, and SEBA, which means tomorrow. SEBA. I'll see you at 11 o'clock. SEBA. So I need to stop for a second because I want to check in on one really important conversation that we need to have, okay? When you get done with a chapter in a bigger book, you want to sit back for a minute and think about what you just read. It's okay. It's a natural process. People like Mag probably can do this really quickly because she's older and she has had a lot of practice. But as you practice being a great reader, it takes time to kind of sit back and wonder what has happened. So if I sit back and I think about what has happened in this chapter, Matt woke up and grandfather came in. He didn't look very different. This time Attean came, Nequenis, his grandson. And because Matt had lost a boot, Saknis decided that he was going to bring him a pair of moccasins. So a few days later, 3 days later, I remember, it said that that he was going to bring him some moccasins. So he brings these beautiful moccasins. And Matt realizes, because he's a polite guy, do you notice that? I mean, an impolite person like Ben wouldn't have done all this. Ben has given him medicine. He comes back to check on him consistently. And he's given him these beautiful moccasins. Matt says, my mom and dad taught me well. I'm supposed to say thank you somehow, maybe gift him. But he looked around and he didn't have anything. And except for two things. He had two things. What were those two things? Books. And he couldn't give one of them away because it was his father's Bible. And so that tells me that they're pretty religious and they believe in religious things. And if they're reading the Bible, that's a special kind, that's a certain kind of religion. And then his other book was a book called Robinson Crusoe, which is an old book. And it's a really cool book about a guy who gets stuck on this island. And we'll tell you more about that later. But he says, this is what I have. And Saknis looks at it. Doesn't know what it is. He opens it up and he sees that there's words written inside, or at least squiggles. And he says, can you read this? And so that means Matt is literate. He can read. And so Saknis says that when the Native Americans saw that the white man was coming, that they welcomed them, but then the white people had them sign treaties. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. Signed treaties and took away the hunting land. And so he wants Attean to read white man's language, our language, English, so that he can make sure he knows what is on those pieces of paper. You get that? So this is a good reason. Like, this is a fair trade. This is an opportunity for Saknis and his family to not lose more land to the white people who come. Chapter 7. Oh, duh. And Saknis says, you're going to teach Attean to read. And now, let me ask you something. How would you start teaching somebody to read? Probably tell them good stories. Let's find out what happens. Before he had his eyes open the next morning, Matt knew to start. When it came back to him, he sat up with a groan. Oh, Attean. What had possessed him to give a book to an Indian? How could he possibly teach a savage to read? What? Savage? This is a little bit of a lesson, ladies and gentlemen. There were many people who said because they didn't dress like us, didn't act like us, didn't believe in the same gods as we did, those kinds of things, that these Native Americans were savage. And so in Matt's mind, that's just what they called them. So I have to use his language because that's what's in the book. But I had to pay attention to that because the word savage is not really the kind of story that I would have for Native Americans who I've spent time with. He tried to think back to the time his mother had taught him his ABCs. He could plainly see that brown-covered primer that she held in her hand when he learned the ABCs. He had detested it. He had had to learn the short verses printed beside each letter. A, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. That would hardly do. To be honest, he wasn't sure that to this day, just what it might mean. He would feel mighty silly trying to explain it to a heathen. Heathen. That's a word that means that you don't believe the same kind of things that they do. So he's calling Attean a heathen. Then, happily, he recalled another book that had been sent to his sister, Sarah, from England, with a small picture to illustrate all the letters. No nonsense about Adam. A was for apple. Sarah had been luckier than he. But he had no way of making pictures, and there were no apples here in the forest. What could he find for A that an Indian would understand? He looked about the cabin. T for table. Though it was unlikely he'd ever get that as far as T. How about A for arm? That was simple enough. B? His eyes fell on the leg bone of the squirrel left from last night's meal. The stub of a candle would do for C. D? Door would be just the word for Attean. He certainly and would again, no doubt, long before they got to D. He doubted that Attean would come, a cold Indian corn cake, and set about to prepare a schoolroom. He shoved the two stools together and laid Robinson Crusoe on the table. So he's going to use the book to teach. He did not have paper or ink. He found ribbon of birch bark in a corner and tore off a strip and sharpened a stick to a point. Then he waited. Birch bark. Birch bark is a really cool bark that comes off of trees, and it's like papery stuff. We don't have it down here in Georgia, but Minnesota people, they do up there. Colorado, you have aspen, and it's kind of the same thing, but it doesn't peel off like birch does. Birch is really cool because when you peel it off, you can actually write on it like paper. So he's at least got a sharp stick, and some birch bark. Attean came, swinging a dead rabbit by the ears. He slung it disdainfully onto the table. Thank you, Matt said. That's a big one. I won't need anything else for several days. That teaches me something. His politeness brought no response. Sit here, he ordered. He hesitated. I never thought as how I'd have to teach anyone to read, but I have figured a way to start at least. Silently, the boy sat down, as straight and rigid as a cedar post. When Matt hunched himself onto the other stool, the boy scowled deeply. Plainly, he did not like having the white boy so close to him. Attean had no need to be finicky, Matt thought. He smelled none too sweet himself. It wasn't that Matt smelled, but he said, Attean doesn't smell really great either. The grease smeared on his body, even on his hair, stunk up the whole cabin. It was supposed to keep off the mosquitoes, he'd heard, but he thought he'd rather have the pesky insects himself. He drew a letter on the birch bark. This is the first letter, he explained. A. Attean kept to his stubborn, scornful silence. Matt set his jaw. He could be stubborn too, he decided. He opened Robinson Crusoe. We'll pick out the A's on this page, he said, trying to control his impatience. He pointed. Now you show me an A. So they're looking at all the pages in a book, and he's going, here's one, and he shows him an A. And now he's going to ask Attean to be able to do it. I've tried this in my classroom. I don't think it's going to work very well. Attean stared straight ahead of him. Then, to Matt's astonishment, he grudgingly laid a grubby finger on a letter A. Good, said Matt, copying the word Saknis used so often. Find another. Suddenly, the boy broke his silence. White man's book foolish, he scoffed. Why, right arm, all over the paper. Puzzled at first, Matt saw his own mistake. Hundreds of other words begin with A, he explained, or have A in them. And there are 25 more letters, Attean scowled. How long? He demanded. What do you mean? How long Attean learned signs in book? It will take some time, Matt said. There are a lot of long words in this book. 1 moon? 1 month? Of course not. It might take a year. Hold on. So Attean said, how long is this going to take? And he said, is it going to take 1 moon? I don't know. Many of you guys probably know. Do you know how many weeks or how many days it takes for the moon to go all the way around the Earth? And when it makes its full phases of the Earth, remember it starts out new moon, then first quarter moon, which kind of looks like a half moon. And then you go to full moon. And then you go to 3/4 moon. And then you go back to new moon. And it takes 28 days to do that. So he said, is it going to take one moon? And then Matt smartly says, 1 month? Of course not. It might take a year. With one that could speak, Attean was out of the cabin and gone. Reckon that's the end of lessons, Matt said to him cheerfully. He began to skin the rabbit and was grateful for the food. So Attean came, tried to teach him the letter A, but then all of a sudden he saw all the letter A's and figured all of them meant arm. And so you look at a page and you see all the A's, and then you all of a sudden go, oh my gosh, arm, 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 arm. Attean is not very happy about having to learn this language. By the next morning, chapter 8, by the next morning, he was half sorry the boy would not be coming again. He didn't know whether he was annoyed or relieved when Attean finally walked through the door without a sign of greeting and sat down at the table. Matt decided to skip B for bone. In the night, he had thought of a better way. This book that we're reading isn't a treaty, he began. It's a story. It's about a man who gets shipwrecked on a desert island. I'll read some of it out loud to show you. He opened Robinson Crusoe at the first page and he began to read. I was born in the year 1632 in the city of York. He stopped. He remembered suddenly how the first time he had tried to read this book, he had found that the first page was so boring that he had come close to giving up right there. Connection. I got that too. I'd be like, yeah, not very exciting things are happening. Therefore, I don't think that the rest of the book's going to be very good. Sometimes reading, you're going to have to get through slow days. But the reality is that there are no slow days in this book because it's not long enough. So he had tried to read this book that he had found first page so dull, he had come close to giving it up right there. He had better skip the beginning and get on with the story if he wanted to catch Attean's attention. I'll read the part about the storm at sea, he said. He had read the book so many times that he knew exactly where to find the right place. Taking a deep breath, he thought as though he were struggling in the water with himself. He chose the page where Robinson Crusoe, nothing can describe the confusion of thought which I felt when I sunk into the water. For though I swam very well, yet I could not deliver myself from the waves so as to draw breath. For I saw the sea come after me as high and as great as a hill, and as furious as my enemy. Wow, those are fancy words, aren't they? Sometimes I might have to reread it. To me, I'm going to say that it sounds a little bit like a diary. Nothing can describe the confusion of thought which I felt when I sunk into the water. I get that part. That means that he fell into the water. For though I swam very well, I could not deliver myself from the waves to draw breath. Oh, I get it. He's a good swimmer, but he couldn't get to the top to draw breath, which probably means so he could breathe. For I saw the sea come after me as big as a great hill and as furious as an enemy. I get it. So he's obviously stuck in the ocean. Matt looked up from the page. There was not a flicker of interest in the boy's face. Had he understood a single word? Discouraged, Matt laid down the book. What did a storm at sea mean to a savage who had lived all his life in the middle of the forest? Well, he said lamely, it does get better if you go along. Once more, Attean took him by surprise. White man get out of water? He asked. Oh, yes, Matt said, delighted. Everyone else on the ship is drowned. He gets thrown up alone on an island. The Indian nodded. He seemed satisfied and a little bit more interested. Shall I read more of it? Matt asked. Attean nodded again. Go now, he said. Come back, SEBA. SEBA. Tomorrow. Come back, SEBA. The next morning, there was no question of B for bone. Matt had the book open and waiting at the part he wanted to read. This moment is about the morning after the storm, he explained. Robinson Crusoe looks out and sees that to save some things and carry them back to shore. He began to read. Once again, it was impossible to tell whether Attean understood the story. Presently, Matt slowed down. It was discouraging, reading to a wooden post. Matt, reading to a wooden post. Oh, I get it. It was discouraging reading to a wooden post. It's because Attean's not saying anything. Attean's not responding. Have you ever had one of those conversations? Have you ever had one of those conversations where you sit down and you're trying to tell somebody really excited? Are you guys listening? Are you out there? Oh, yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. It's hard sometimes because you may have been distracted doing your writing, or you may have been distracted doing something, but it was at that moment where Matt feels like he's reading to a wooden post. He's not reading to a wooden post. That's a metaphor. He's just turned Attean into a wooden post. Matt slowed down. It was discouraging reading to a wooden post. But Attean spoke at once. "White man not smart like Indian," he said scornfully. "Indian not need thing from ship. Indian make all thing he need." Disappointed and cross, Matt put the book down. They might as well go on with the alphabet. He drew a B on the birch bark. After Attean had gone, Matt kept thinking about Robinson Crusoe and all the useful things that he had managed to salvage from the ship. He had found a carpenter's chest, for instance, bags of nails, 2 barrels of bullets, and a dozen hatchets. A dozen! Why, Matt and his father had come up to Maine with only 1 axe and an adze. They had cut down trees and built this whole cabin and the table and the stools without a single nail. Wow, that's pretty impressive. Crusoe had found a hammock to sleep in instead of prickly hemlock boughs. He could see now that it must have sounded to Attean, or how it must have sounded to Attean. Come to think of it, Robinson Crusoe had lived like a king on that desert island. Wow, that is good. I think that this is a great place for us to finish. What I feel like I have gathered in the period of time that we had reading today is this. First, really important, Matt isn't completely alone. Second, even though he's not very happy about it, Attean seems to be coming back, which means that he must be getting at least a little bit interested in the story. So Matt chose a really good way to get him to come in, right? Third, Attean definitely has some anger about white people. You notice how many times he says how silly or stupid or how less than that Matt is? And it sounds like he's kind of trying to keep himself strong. So that is a really, really important piece to this story. Ladies and gentlemen, our time is up. Remember, tomorrow is Friday. That means we start at 11 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock in Minnesota and the Central Time, 9 o'clock in the mountains of the Rockies, and 8 o'clock for those of you who are earlier than that. Ladies and gentlemen, school is out for me, and it is time for me to go start playing with my sweetheart. We're going to go outside, and we're going to get ourselves ready for a little bit of an adventure that we're going to be going on, which means I'll probably start talking to you a little bit about that tomorrow. But what I'm going to share with you is that every single day, Monday through Friday, there will be more being read. I can't thank you enough for being here today. Mr. Ryan L., thanks for being here. Mag, thank you for being here. Whoever are the quiet ones out there, I know maybe you just don't have a subscription, but I will tell you, keep coming back. Such a good story. I'm going to tell you that these two, although they don't seem to be very good friends right now, I now have a pretty good idea who those 2 guys are in the front. And I'm still wondering how in the world that bear is going to come out of this story. Go outside, be barefoot, enjoy the springtime, enjoy this moment in your life because it's the only one you got. I love you. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Now get out of here. Love you.